Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the flickering glow of ancient Athens, the kind of night where oil lamps sway in the breeze and your sandals scuff against uneven stones. You hear the faint creak of a cart being pulled somewhere in the darkness, a dog barking once and then thinking better of it, and the occasional splash from someone pouring out a basin of water onto the street. If you tilt your head just right, you can smell smoke from olive wood fires, a whiff of grilled fish, and the faint, sour tang of fermenting wine drifting out from taverns. You're here, in a world 2,000 years removed, and yet you're supposed to survive without Wi-Fi. Yeah, you probably won't survive this.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets curve and open into wider spaces, and that's when you start noticing something curious. Amid the chatter of vendors and the clatter of cups, there's a buzz about a new phenomenon, the gymnasium. You'd expect the word gym to make you picture neon logos and the smell of protein powder, but here it means an open courtyard, echoing with shouts, sweat, and philosophy in equal measure. You picture it lit faintly by the moon. Marble columns rise like pale ghosts in the distance, and torches stuck in iron holders along the walls throw jittery shadows. The stone paving is cold under your feet, but beyond the threshold you hear bare soles slapping the sand, bodies colliding, voices chanting drills. The Athenians treat this place as more than exercise. It's an arena where the city's soul stretches its muscles. Mainstream history notes that Athens was dotted with gymnasia, often near sanctuaries, because the Greeks blended physical training with spiritual reverence. They weren't shy about saying the gods admired a well-tuned human form. And because gymnos literally means naked, you don't even get the modesty of gym shorts. The air smells of olive oil because the young men lather themselves before training, partly for skin protection, partly for shine. You imagine stepping in, trying not to look directly at anyone's shimmering thighs. That here's your quirky tidbit. Some Athenians claimed that wrestling by torchlight was superior to daylight practice. Why? Because fighting in half-shadow supposedly trained your instincts better. You can imagine the practical problem of grabbing a sweaty stranger in the dark and hoping you're not actually hugging a column. But that mix of absurdity and ritual is precisely what makes the atmosphere vivid. As you drift deeper into this imagined night, you realize the gym is not just a sweaty corner of the city. It's a civic institution. Citizens gossip about politics here. Tutors quiz their pupils on geometry while they catch their breath, and priests occasionally wander through to bless the space. Historians still argue whether the earliest gymnasia were more religious sanctuaries than training grounds, or whether athletics simply hijacked sacred land for their own purposes. Either way, you sense how inseparable body and spirit are in this society. The chatter of the crowd around you grows. You hear someone talking about Homer's heroes, Achilles sprinting across the plains, Odysseus wrestling with storms, and Heracles lifting, well, literally everything. The implication is clear. To be Greek is to cultivate yourself into a kind of mythic figure, equal parts brawn and brain. You feel your own shoulders slump at the thought. You haven't done a push-up in weeks. The torch nearest you sputters, spitting a little resin into the air. The glow hits the curved edge of a bronze discus propped against a wall. Some youth nearby is bragging he can throw it farther than last time, while his friend insists he should stop before denting another statue. From somewhere deeper in the yard, you hear rhythmic claps, men marking cadence for runners sprinting laps. The whole place vibrates like a hive, energy circling endlessly, as if even the night itself refuses to rest. And yet, despite the energy, there's something soporific about the rhythm. The scrape of sandals across sand, the steady pulse of bodies striking bodies, the repetitive chants of instruction, they create a lullaby of exertion. You lean against the stone, half amused, half mesmerized, and it occurs to you that 2 millennia later people will still be paying monthly fees for the privilege of sweating together in a box. Only difference? Back then, there weren't any fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, no overpriced smoothies waiting in the corner, and absolutely no mirrors for selfies. Your eyelids grow heavier as the torchlight softens. In this Athens of long ago, the night stretches lazily, and the promise of tomorrow's training echoes faintly in the distance. But for now, you simply breathe in the mingled scents of oil, smoke, and ambition, and let yourself drift further into their world. The dawn begins to smudge its pale light across the sky, and you find yourself wandering toward the agora, where merchants are setting up their stalls and chatter spills out like birdsong. But instead of staring at olives and amphorae, your ears catch a different thread weaving through the morning bustle. Conversations about heroes, about legends, about what it means to be strong. You realize that long before gymnasia became everyday destinations, the Greeks were already obsessed with a much older script, the epic tales of Homer. You can picture it. Some old man with a grizzled beard leaning on his staff, reciting the Iliad for a rapt audience of boys. Achilles, gleaming like the sun, sprinting across the battlefield. Hector, fierce and tragic, swinging his spear. These figures weren't just warriors. They were ideals carved into language, echoes of muscles flexing in verse. For the Greeks, to train your body was to echo the legends, to rehearse being part of a story that began centuries earlier. You can't really argue with that. Your own workout playlist suddenly feels underwhelming compared to epic poetry. Mainstream history reminds us that Homer's epics weren't dusty textbooks, but living, breathing scripts for life. Young men learned courage and resilience from these lines, and if they wanted to embody those virtues, they had to sweat for it. Gymnasia became the natural extension of storytelling. If Achilles could run like the wind, so could you. Well, you could try, assuming you hadn't skipped leg day. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Greeks actually staged mock battles to test strength, blurring theater and training. Imagine rehearsing a battle while someone narrates in Homeric style, shouting, and lo, he lunges with his left. It was both hilarious and serious, an exercise in becoming a living poem. You might laugh, but deep down, you'd also feel the pressure to perform, the street smell of freshly baked bread, sesame seeds popping on the crusts, and you drift toward one of the early gym yards. Young men stretch their arms, their tunics already tossed aside. A teacher, called a paidotribes, paces with a stick, tapping shoulders and correcting stances, quoting Homer as if the epics themselves were training manuals. And it works. The rhythm of the verse blends with the thud of running feet, making each movement feel as though it's linked to some cosmic choreography. Historians still argue whether Homer's heroes were meant as literal role models or symbolic archetypes. But the effect was real enough. Boys grew up thinking that to be Greek was to wrestle like Ajax, to run like Atlanta. Well, she was technically female, but her speed was legendary, and to endure like Odysseus. You can imagine the competitiveness it fueled. No one wanted to be remembered as the guy who tripped during a sprint and face-planted in front of the gods. You watch one youth throw a javelin so far it nearly scares a donkey grazing nearby. His friends roar with laughter, and he grins like a mini Achilles who just conquered Troy. Another boy recites a line from Homer, puffing out his chest dramatically. You roll your eyes, but admit there's a certain charm in how seamlessly myth and muscle intertwine. And yet, it isn't just vanity or bragging rights. The Greeks believed physical training made the mind sharper too. You can see a philosopher strolling through, robe trailing in the dust, ready to quiz exhausted athletes about virtue, justice, and geometry. Picture finishing your sprints only to have someone ask, "But what is courage, truly?" while you gasp for breath. That's one way to multitask, although you're not sure your own brain would handle it. The voices around you swell with pride. Men argue whether Achilles was stronger than Heracles, whether Odysseus' cunning was greater than brawn. It's basically the ancient version of debating superhero powers, only with more tunics and fewer action figures. And slowly, you begin to see how the entire society wove itself around these ideals. The gym was not just about health. It was about rehearsing mythology, about stepping into a lineage that stretched all the way back to gods and monsters. A breeze stirs the dust, and you blink against the morning sun. Somewhere nearby, a lyre begins to play, a soft plucking that underscores the rhythm of training. The sound mingles with the slap of sandals and the grunt of effort, creating an accidental soundtrack. And as the city wakes fully, you realize Athens itself is one enormous stage, and everyone here is cast as hero in training, whether they like it or not. The music fades into the background, leaving only the steady hum of exertion, and you can't help but smile. You might not be Achilles, but for tonight, wandering these ancient streets, you're part of their world, sweating, striving, and quietly hoping the gods are watching. The sun climbs higher, gilding the pale stone of Athens, and you shuffle toward a courtyard where the air feels heavier, full of heat, laughter, and the unmistakable smell of olive oil. You've stumbled into the gymnos. Yes, the literal naked place. Don't worry, I'll spare you the graphic details. But you can't help noticing that this is the original stage for what later societies would call body culture. Here, clothes are optional, muscles are mandatory, and inhibitions are checked. At the door, you watch as young men gather on a sandy floor, bare skin glistening with oil. Trainers stand nearby, barking commands, tapping calves or shoulders with thin rods to adjust posture. You wonder for a second whether this counts as personal training or a strange form of group massage. Either way, the Greeks seem unfazed by the nudity. It's just the uniform of citizenship, proof that you belong to the polis. The message is clear. If you want to be taken seriously in Athens, you'll need to run, wrestle, and shine with a healthy coat of oil. Mainstream history explains that the gymnasium wasn't merely tolerated, it was celebrated. The very word, gymnos, comes from the practice of training unclothed, something that shocked outsiders but made perfect sense in Greek logic. Without armor or tunics, you moved freely, displayed discipline, and, let's be honest, showed off. Statues that lined temple walls weren't exaggerations. They mirrored exactly what citizens expected of themselves. You begin to realize the cultural obsession, beauty, strength, and citizenship were braided together like the strands of a laurel wreath. Here's a quirky tidbit. After exercise, men coated in sand would scrape their bodies with curved bronze tools called strigils. The oily, sandy gunk was then collected and, in some cases, sold as medicine. Yes, people believed that athlete sweat mixed with dust had healing properties. Imagine someone bottling your gym towel after spin class and marketing it as a miracle. Here, that's either entrepreneurship or public health hazard, depending on your view. The courtyard hums with the rhythm of training. Some wrestlers crouch low, eyes locked, each waiting for the other to slip. Others sprint across the yard, feet kicking up dust in a blur of speed. In a corner, a group practices discus throws, the bronze flashing against the sky like miniature suns. You squint as one nearly whizzes past your head and realize the ancient insurance industry must have had its hands full. Historians still argue whether these gymnasia were truly open to all male citizens or primarily elite playgrounds. Some sources suggest every boy could enter once he reached adolescence. Others hint that only the wealthier classes, who could afford to linger, dominated the scene. The uncertainty doesn't diminish the effect. You can tell the gym was a gateway into social standing. To shine with oil under the Athenian sun meant you were part of something larger than yourself. You pause near the colonnade, where shadows pool against marble pillars. Here, philosophers sit cross-legged, watching athletes train. One gestures toward a runner, using the man's steady pace as a metaphor for virtue. Another points to a wrestling match, weaving a quick lesson about balance in life and balance in combat. You realize this gym is half training ground, half TED Talk, except with a lot more sweating and slightly fewer slides. The air is thick now, full of shouts, grunts, and laughter. A youth stumbles in the sand, face first, and his friends roar. In mock sympathy, he sits up, spitting grit, but grins anyway, because to fall here is to prove you're at least trying. Another wrestles his opponent down with such force that the crowd applauds, the sound echoing off the stone. The energy is infectious, and even though you're only drifting through, you feel your own shoulders straighten, your breath deepen, as though your body wants to join. Then the strigils scrape again, the metallic sound like a chorus of tiny violins. Oil and sand are brushed into jars, bodies gleam once more, and the gym begins to quiet. For a moment, the sun catches a bead of sweat rolling down someone's back, turning it into a diamond flash. You blink, and the whole scene feels surreal, equal parts intimate and monumental. And as the athletes recline, sipping diluted wine, debating Homer or laughing about missed moves, you realize you've just witnessed the Greek obsession distilled. The gymnos ideal, where body and soul are stripped bare, polished with oil, and displayed proudly as part of civic life. By now the sun has climbed high, pouring molten gold across marble columns, and you wander deeper into the gymnasium, where the sweat-soaked air hums not just with the rhythm of exercise, but with something subtler, the pulse of status. You start to realize the place is less like your neighborhood fitness center and more like a members-only country club. Except here, the bouncer is tradition itself. You watch men stretching in the sand, bodies gleaming with olive oil, and it's clear that what's happening isn't only about health. It's a performance. In Athens, physical fitness signals more than stamina. It's a visible badge of citizenship. A strong chest and powerful strides say, "I belong. I am worthy." Meanwhile, if you were scrawny or out of shape, you risked whispers that you lacked discipline or even patriotism. Honestly, the ancient equivalent of skipping leg day could have been a political liability. Mainstream history underlines this. The Greeks equated kalokagathia, beauty joined with goodness, with ideal citizenship. To be respected, you needed both a sharp mind and a trained body. Politicians, generals, and even philosophers were expected to show up at the gymnasium, partly to prove they weren't soft, partly to mingle in the smoky currents of social life. You couldn't just say you were virtuous, you had to look like it. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some wealthier Athenians hired professional oil boys, attendants who carried jars of olive oil, applied it before exercise, and scraped it off afterward. These young helpers weren't just servants. They became a kind of fashion accessory, proof of your wealth. Imagine today someone strolling into your gym flanked by a personal smoothie holder whose job is to tally you down. Practical and ridiculous. In equal measure, the courtyard is alive with this hierarchy. You notice how the more muscular youths stand closer to the center, where everyone can see them sparring. Meanwhile, the less confident linger at the edges, practicing javelin throws, or jogging quietly in circles. Trainers hover like hawks, shouting encouragement to some, barking criticism at others. Even here, social stratification seeps through, strength becomes currency, and the gymnasium doubles as a bank of reputation. Historians still argue whether lower-class citizens truly got equal access. Some records describe gymnasia open to all, freeborn males, yet inscriptions suggest wealthier families dominated. The debate lingers like the scent of oil in the air, unresolved but fascinating. What's certain is that exercise wasn't just exercise. It was a political act, a demonstration that you were fit to serve in battle and, just as importantly, fit to stand in the assembly. You imagine a group of aristocrats lounging under the portico after training, sipping watered wine and laughing about the latest vote. A wiry youth struts by, and one of them mutters that his biceps look more suited for holding lyres than spears. The group chuckles, not cruelly but knowingly, as if muscle mass were a ballad in itself. You realize the gym is a stage where reputations are forged, reputations that ripple outward into courtrooms, councils, and theaters at the same time. There's a strange tenderness. Friends oil each other's backs, share tips about foot placement, or joke about who tripped in the sand yesterday. This mix of competition and camaraderie feels timeless. You've seen the same in modern gyms, where people flex for mirrors, yet still spot each other on the bench press. The Athenian version just replaces mirrors with marble statues and workout playlists with lyres. The noise dips for a moment. A philosopher gestures toward a sweating athlete, using him as an example in a lecture about self-control. Another citizen praises the gods for gifting the polis with such strong youth. And you, leaning against a cool stone column, catch the shimmering undertone. This is Athens rehearsing itself, flexing not only muscles but the identity of the city as the day lengthens. The chatter thickens with politics, gossip, and laughter. You hear someone boast that his cousin was just admitted to a more exclusive gym across town, where the fees are higher and the wine colder. Another insists his lineage descends from heroes, and therefore his chest measurements must surely reflect divine favor. The claims are absurd, but you see how status threads itself through every bead of sweat. And so you linger, watching as bodies rise and fall in rhythm, as olive oil gleams, as voices debate and brag. You realize you're witnessing more than training. You're watching citizenship sculpt itself in real time. A society convinced that the measure of a man is visible in the way his shoulders glisten under the midday sun. The afternoon light tilts across the city, softening the edges of stone, and you drift back into the gymnasium where the energy has shifted. The fierce rhythm of wrestling and sprinting has quieted, replaced by something stranger, almost ritualistic. Men are now crouched near benches, anointing themselves with olive oil, sprinkling sand over their glistening skin, and then scraping the mixture off again with curved bronze strigils. You can't help thinking it looks like an odd spa treatment designed by someone who really liked dust. Mainstream history tells us this wasn't vanity alone. Olive oil was believed to protect skin from the sun and to warm the body before training. The sand provided grip in wrestling and helped absorb sweat. And when exercise ended, the scraping wasn't just for cleanliness. It was symbolic, a way of shedding the day's exertion. To the Greeks, physical labor deserved ritual closure. You don't just collapse on a couch. You scrape your body until it gleams, like polishing a statue. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some apothecaries collected the oil and sweat mixture scraped from famous athletes, bottling it as a tonic. People actually paid to smear themselves with recycled athlete gunk, convinced it could heal or boost vigor. Imagine a modern brand selling organic Olympian essence, now in travel size. Equal parts disgusting and brilliant marketing. The sound of strigils fills the air, a metallic rasp like a chorus of cicadas. The men move methodically, dragging bronze over skin, flicking clumps of oily sand onto the ground. Trainers walk among them, offering advice, sometimes demonstrating how to reach the awkward spot between shoulder blades. It feels oddly tender. This communal scraping, like the athletes are carving themselves clean together. Historians still argue whether the ritual had deeper religious meaning or was merely hygienic. Some sources hint at links to purification before sacrifices, while others suggest it was plain practicality. The ambiguity hangs like the olive-scented mist in the air, unresolved but rich with possibility. Nearby, attendants carry jars of fresh oil, pouring it generously into athletes' hands. They rub it into shoulders, calves, and forearms, massaging tired muscles. A young boy tasked with refilling lamps pauses to watch, wide-eyed, before being shooed away. You picture him retelling the scene later with exaggerated gestures, his audience giggling at the thought of so much slippery skin. You edge closer to a group sprawled on benches, their bodies glowing in the fading light. One man jokes about slipping like an eel during his last wrestling match. Another boasts that his strigil scraping produced more miracle goo than anyone else today, and maybe he should sell it himself. The group bursts into laughter, their camaraderie woven through humor and sweat. From the colonnade, a philosopher raises his voice, drawing attention to the scraping itself. He claims it symbolizes the removal of vice, that just as you shed grime, so too must you shed arrogance or greed. The athletes roll their eyes, but the metaphor lingers. Even here, between the clumps of sand and oily rags, the Greeks can't resist blending body and soul into one lesson. The air is thick with competing scents, sharp olive oil, dusty sand, faint sweat, and the earthy undertone of clay jars stacked against the wall. A breeze stirs, carrying it all toward you like an aromatic reminder that history is rarely neat or sterile. You take a deep breath, surprised that the blend is oddly calming, like an ancient candle no influencer has yet tried to sell. And as the scraping winds down, the courtyard quiets again. Bodies gleam, smooth and warm, and men stretch lazily on benches, eyes half closed. The rituals of oil, sand, and strigil have left them not just clean but renewed, their exhaustion transformed into something almost serene. You watch the last flecks of sand drift away in the breeze and realize you're witnessing more than hygiene. It's a lullaby of labor, a strange and soothing rhythm, where sweat becomes a pathway to peace. The scrape of strigils fades into memory as you wander farther under the colonnades, where shade pools like cool water and voices carry softer. Here, you find not just athletes sprawled on benches, but tutors and philosophers mingling with the smell of olive oil and sweat. The gymnasium, you realize, isn't only a training yard. It's a classroom without walls. A group of young men sits cross-legged in a semicircle, their bodies still glistening from exercise. Before them, a petatribes, part coach, part teacher, gestures, with a reed staff, speaking about posture, discipline, and rhythm. Yet it's not only physical. Between advice on lunges and wrestling holds, he slips in riddles about courage and temperance. You imagine trying to solve a moral puzzle while still panting from a sprint. It's like being quizzed on philosophy right after a set of burpees. Unfair, but effective. Mainstream history shows that the gymnasium doubled as a center of education. Boys and young men learned grammar, music, and philosophy in the same spaces, where they practiced discus throws. The Greeks saw no split between muscle and mind. You sculpted both together. The famous philosopher Plato, whose very name means broad-shouldered, supposedly trained as a wrestler before sharpening his dialogues. You get the sense he could out-debate you and pin you to the sand, which is frankly terrifying. Quirky tidbit. Some trainers believed music had a direct effect on muscles. They'd play flutes or lyres during exercise, claiming certain rhythms encouraged strength or endurance. Imagine your local gym swapping out EDM playlists for a single guy, piping on a reed flute, insisting it'll improve your deadlift. Strange, maybe, but the Greeks swore by it. Under the shade, you notice older philosophers too, robes draped, beards flowing, voices calm. One points at wrestlers in the sand, musing that balance in sport reflects balance in life. Another praises a runner's steady breathing, calling it proof of self-control. You realize the athletes are live metaphors, their movements repurposed into teaching moments. Historians still argue whether philosophers genuinely came here to learn from sport, or if they mostly used athletes as convenient illustrations for abstract ideas. Either way, the gymnasium gave them endless examples. A breeze rolls in, stirring the hem of a robe. You catch fragments of debate. What defines virtue? Whether courage comes from the gods or from training, whether the mind or the body shapes the other more. The young men nod, frown, or smirk, their muscles slackening as their minds tighten around new concepts. The air hums with both sweat and syllogisms. You picture the strangeness of it. One moment grappling in the sand, the next arguing whether justice exists outside human perception. And yet, it works. The Greek recipe for a citizen is right here. Body tested by strain, mind tested by words, all simmering together under the Athenian sun. From the corner, a boy with a lyre plucks a melody, weaving sound around the debate. The music softens the mood, turning intellectual sparring into a lullaby of logic. One athlete, too tired to care, lies flat on the stone floor, eyes closed, mouthing along to the rhythm as though drifting between worlds. You can almost hear his heartbeat slowing, syncing with the plucked notes. The courtyard feels calm now. Trainers lean against pillars, philosophers stroke their beards, students murmur to each other. The frenzy of exercise has melted into reflection, and the gymnasium has become a sanctuary of mixed energies, sweat cooling on skin, thoughts heating in the mind. And as you watch the light shift across the marble, you feel yourself soften too, lulled by the blend of wisdom and workouts. Like a lecture wrapped in a warm towel, as you drift deeper into the shaded courtyard, the murmur of philosophers and the scrape of strigils give way to something heavier in the air, a sense of reverence. The gymnasium, you realize, isn't only a place for training bodies and minds. It is also sacred ground, a space where sweat itself becomes an offering. You notice at one end of the complex a small shrine tucked beneath the columns. It smells faintly of burnt herbs and olive oil, a soft haze drifting from an altar where a priest tends the flame. The god honored here might be Hermes, patron of athletes, or Heracles, the muscle-bound hero whose labors were legendary. Some gymnasia even honored local heroes, men elevated to divine status because of their feats. You picture athletes pausing before they run, whispering quick prayers, as if the gods themselves were watching their form. Mainstream history records that gymnasia were often linked to sanctuaries. Training could be an act of devotion, and victories in sport were framed as tributes to the divine. Sculptures of gods stood at entrances, their marble gazes silently reminding every entrant that strength without piety was hollow. Even the Olympic Games began as religious festivals. Athletes competed not only for wreaths, but to honor Zeus himself. The gym, then, was both temple and treadmill. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some places, athletes actually dedicated jars of their used olive oil to the gods. Imagine trudging up to a shrine with a clay vessel full of sweat-soaked goo and declaring, "Behold, O Zeus, my sacred slime." Somehow, the gesture carried weight, proof that the gods valued the physical struggle of mortals. A strange, sticky gift, but heartfelt. The athletes around you move with a subtle solemnity now. After their exercises, some bow slightly toward the shrine. Others rub oil into their chests, murmuring invocations for victory in upcoming contests. You watch as one young man carefully lays a small wreath of laurel leaves near the altar, his face flushed from exertion but glowing with pride. It's a reminder that every sprint, every grapple, every drop of sweat is part of a larger dialogue with the divine. Historians still argue whether these sacred gestures were primarily heartfelt devotion or clever social performance. Was the athlete truly honoring Hermes, or was he showing the crowd that he knew his place in tradition? The line blurs, and maybe it never mattered. To the Greeks, blending worship and training was simply natural. Two halves of the same whole. You lean against a column and watch as the light shifts. The shrine glows softly in the dim, catching flecks of gold on statues' shoulders. A priest sprinkles more herbs on the flame, the smoke curling upward like a lazy dancer. Athletes stretch beside it, chatting casually about tomorrow's exercises, unbothered by the mingling of sacred and mundane. You sense how seamlessly their world wove together the divine and the everyday. One older man, his back bowed but his voice steady, tells a younger athlete that Heracles himself trained here once, lifting stones and wrestling lions, or so the story goes. The youth grins nervously, as if some fragment of that mythic strength might still be absorbed through the sand under his feet. You half expect the statue nearby to wink at him, though thankfully it doesn't. The mood is drowsy now. The combination of exertion, ritual, and warm sunlight has settled the courtyard into a hushed rhythm. Somewhere, a lyre twangs lazily. Somewhere else, sandals scuff against stone as men shuffle home. The shrine flickers with its quiet flame, a reminder that in ancient Athens, even your sweat belonged to something greater. And as you watch the last athlete bow toward the altar, you feel the city breathe through him, a collective exhale of piety and pride. In this place, devotion isn't whispered in distant temples alone. It glistens in every muscle. It drips with every bead of sweat. It lingers in the very air. The evening settles in with a cooler breeze, and you wander past the shrine's fading incense into another corner of the gymnasium. The air shifts again, less sacred now, more practical, buzzing with the sound of voices tallying costs, arguing over stipends, and debating who exactly gets to train here. You begin to realize that what looks like a casual gathering of sweaty bodies is, in fact, an institution with rules, funding, and, yes, fees. Welcome to the rise of paid memberships. You hear a man in a linen tunic clink a small pouch of coins, handing them over to an attendant at the entrance. In return, he's granted access to the courtyard. Another mutters complaints about rising costs, swearing that in his father's day, training here was free. A trainer nearby smirks, muttering that discipline comes easier when the purse strings are tighter. It dawns on you. The gymnasium was never just about free-spirited exercise. It had become a structured, sometimes exclusive, system of belonging. Mainstream history points out that many gymnasia were funded by wealthy patrons, officials known as gymnasiarchs. They covered the costs of oil, maintenance, and trainers, sometimes as a form of civic duty or political ambition. In return, their names were honored in inscriptions, carved into marble, so everyone remembered who paid for your sweaty sprints. Over time, however, not all access remained free. Fees crept in, and rules of membership became more formalized. The gym was transforming into a managed institution. Quirky tidbit: some gymnasiarchs were notorious for cutting corners. Ancient jokes mocked officials who watered down the oil or locked the storerooms early, forcing athletes to scrape themselves clean with barely enough to shine. Imagine showing up to your modern gym only to find out the water cooler's been rationed and the treadmill's cut off after 10 minutes. Petty mismanagement, but apparently timeless. The courtyard reveals these dynamics in subtle ways. You notice certain men lounging confidently in the central area, obviously accustomed to belonging. Others hover at the edges, eyes darting toward attendants as if afraid of being asked for proof of payment. Trainers give more attention to those from wealthy families, clapping them on the back, offering extra tips. The less privileged still train, but with fewer nods of approval. The sand records their footsteps just the same, yet the social lines are clearly etched. Historians still argue whether gymnasia were truly democratic spaces or elitist clubs hiding under a civic banner. Some sources insist the state ensured broad access for young citizens, while others suggest that over time, exclusivity crept in, an early hint of the private gym model we know today. The truth is probably a messy mix, where ideals of equality wrestled constantly with realities of wealth. As the evening lengthens, you watch an older man lecture a younger one about discipline, reminding him that paying the entrance fee is part of learning responsibility. Another man boasts about how his family funds half the oil supply for this gym, puffing his chest as though generosity itself were a muscle. The younger ones roll their eyes, but you sense they know their turn will come to brag in the same way. The torchlight flickers against marble walls, shadows stretching long across the sand. The gym feels quieter now, but the hum of hierarchy remains. You imagine these little financial negotiations shaping who could train, who could shine, and who would later stand confidently in the assembly or on the battlefield. Sweat may flow freely, but access to the sweat itself was becoming managed, accounted for, even monetized. As you lean against a column, listening to the soft clink of coins and the murmurs of men negotiating, you realize you're standing in the birthplace of the membership model, an ancient version of that recurring monthly charge on your modern bank statement. Except back then, the perks weren't free towels or air conditioning. They were the privilege of joining your fellow citizens in oil, sand, and status. The air grows cooler, the voice is quieter, but the truth lingers. The gymnasium was not only a training ground or temple. It was also a business, a civic machine greased by olive oil and silver coins alike. The night deepens, torches glow along the colonnade, and you drift closer to the heart of the gym where the air is thick with grunts, thuds, and the sharp smack of flesh against flesh. This is where the Greeks sharpen their edges, where leisure collides with war, and where wrestlers and warriors blur into the same sweaty archetype. Two men crouch low in the sand, eyes locked, their muscles taut as bowstrings. A circle of onlookers forms, clapping in rhythm as the pairs circle each other. With a sudden lunge, they collide, shoulder against chest, legs tangling, sand flying into the firelight. The crowd roars, some shouting advice, others laughing at the sheer ferocity. To you, it looks like an intense hobby. To them, it's both sport and preparation for the battlefield. Mainstream history reminds us that wrestling, pale, was one of the core exercises in Greek gymnasia. Alongside boxing and pankration, a brutal blend of wrestling and striking, these sports doubled as military training. The polis wanted citizens who could not only run marathons, but also wrestle an enemy to the ground when spears broke. In other words, their fun was a rehearsal for war. Here's a quirky tidbit. Pankration matches sometimes included eye gouging and finger breaking, and yet they were still considered honorable. Judges had to carry sticks to swat fighters if they got too savage. Imagine a referee today whacking a UFC fighter mid-bout and shouting, "Tone it down, buddy." Equal parts terrifying and hilarious. The wrestlers in front of you grunt louder, twisting like snakes, one finally pinning the other's shoulder into the sand. The crowd cheers, and someone tosses a handful of leaves into the ring like confetti. The victor beams, chest heaving, but you notice he doesn't gloat too much. Tomorrow, someone else might flip him just as easily. Historians still argue whether these combat sports were more about civic defense or pure entertainment. Were they genuine drills for hoplite warfare, or were they just the Netflix binge of the ancient world, an addictive spectacle? Perhaps both, depending on the day and the city. Either way, the line between warrior and athlete was blurred beyond recognition. Around you, young men practice shield drills, wooden spears in hand, their trainers barking cadence. They lunge, thrust, and retreat, dust rising like smoke. Then, almost casually, they drop the weapons and start grappling in pairs, laughing as they toss each other into the sand. The shift is seamless, as though combat is just another game. And game's just another face of combat. You catch a glimpse of scars on one man's forearm. He brags that he earned it not in war, but in a wrestling match gone wrong. His friends laugh, saying that wound looks heroic enough to fool anyone. Another insists that winning here is better than winning in the battlefield, since at least you get to celebrate with wine afterward instead of risking a spear in the ribs. A philosopher seated nearby shakes his head, muttering that true courage isn't found in snapping joints, but in facing fear. No one listens. They're too busy cheering the next takedown. The philosopher sighs, stroking his beard, but stays anyway. After all, where else would he find such vivid metaphors? The courtyard is alive with rhythm now. Thud, cheer, rasp, laugh. It's intoxicating, and you find yourself leaning forward, caught in the momentum. A wrestler slams his opponent down, the impact echoing off the marble walls, and you feel it vibrate in your chest. For a fleeting moment, you understand why the Greeks adored this blend of play and preparation, why their gymnasia pulsed with both joy and danger. The match ends, the fighters scrape sand off their shoulders, and the crowd disperses into smaller groups, still buzzing. Some head toward the baths. Others sprawl in the colonnade to debate which move was most effective. You linger, the torchlight flickering on the sand like tiny battlefields, each grain a reminder of the thin line between sport and survival. The torchlight flickers lower, casting long shadows over the courtyard, and you follow a stream of men through an arched doorway where steam curls lazily into the night. The atmosphere changes instantly. Less grunting, more chatter, less sand, more splash. You've stepped into the baths, that part of the gymnasium where muscles are soothed, tongues loosened, and politics whispered under the cover of warm water. You blink as you enter. Pools shimmer under lamplight, their surfaces rippling with the laughter of men easing themselves into heat. Attendants carry buckets, pouring steaming water over stone basins, while others fan coals to keep the warmth steady. A low hum fills the air. Gossip, teasing, arguments, the kind of background noise that turns into a lullaby if you close your eyes. Mainstream history explains that the gymnasium was never just for training. It was a social club, a hub where citizens bathed, talked politics, and made business deals. The baths soothed tired limbs, but also dissolved barriers, literally stripping men bare so their conversations could flow. In fact, some decisions about Athenian policies may have been shaped right here. In clouds of steam, here's a quirky tidbit. Some Athenians believed hot baths could dissolve bad humors, while others swore that too much heat made men weak. A few even advocated cold plunges right after a hot soak, insisting it toughen the body. Picture someone sprinting from a sauna into a freezing pool and declaring it the secret to immortality. The Greeks were basically early influencers for wellness fads. The noise in here is different from the gym yard. Where before there was the slap of sandals and the thud of bodies, here there's the splash of water, the clink of cups, the soft slap of palms against shoulders in playful banter. A man brags about his wrestling victory. Another interrupts to mock his technique. Laughter echoes, bouncing off wet stone walls. You realize this place is less battlefield, more living room. Except everyone's unclothed and dripping, historians still argue whether these bathhouse conversations were truly democratic or dominated by elites. Some sources suggest merchants and craftsmen could mingle freely with aristocrats, leveling the social field. Others hint the wealthier classes still held sway, using the baths as extensions of their private networks. Either way, the mixture of steam and talk made for a heady blend of leisure and influence. You lean back in your imagination, letting the heat sink into your muscles. Voices float past, a heated argument about a new tax, a whispered flirtation, a boisterous retelling of a javelin throw gone wrong. Each story ripples across the water, blending into a soup of civic life. You can almost feel your eyelids grow heavier, lulled by the steady rhythm of voices and splashes. One man, face flushed from steam, raises his cup of diluted wine and launches into a joke about how the gods must envy them for having invented baths. His friends chuckle, one quipping that the gods probably smell too much like ambrosia to care. Another insists he once heard of a Spartan who refused to bathe for a year, claiming it built character. The group roars with laughter, their voices filling the misty chambered as you drift. You notice a philosopher perched at the edge of the pool, arguing about justice while dangling his toes in the water. His students nod politely, though you can tell their attention is half on the warmth seeping into their bones. Even here, in a place meant for relaxation, the Greeks cannot resist slipping a lesson into the steam. The air thickens with heat, scents of wet stone and olive soap mingling into something strangely comforting. A torch sputters, its flame wavering in the moist air, casting ripples of light across the water. The sound of conversation dips, replaced by the gentle rhythm of dripping water from a nearby basin. For a moment, the bathhouse hums like a giant heartbeat, steady and soothing. And as you rest against the marble, steam curling around your face, you understand the full circle. The gymnasium is not only about exertion but also release, not only about sweat but also laughter. Here in the baths, the Athenians cleanse both body and mind, leaving behind the dust of the day and carrying forward stories that ripple into the city's future. The steam from the baths still clings to your skin. As you step back into the night air, the courtyard has quieted, though not entirely. Voices drift here and there, softer now, almost secretive. You follow one thread of conversation and realize it's about something missing, or rather, someone missing. No women are here. Not in the training yard, not in the baths, not even as spectators. The gymnasium is an almost exclusively male space, and that absence whispers louder than the chatter itself. You glance around. Rows of oiled bodies sparring, tutors lecturing, philosophers pacing, all male. The silence of women in this landscape feels heavy, like an unplayed note in a melody. For the Greeks, this wasn't accidental. Gym culture was entwined with the duties of citizenship, and citizenship belonged largely to men. Mainstream history tells us that in most of Greece, women's access to gymnasia was sharply limited. In Athens, for example, women were expected to focus on the home, raising children and weaving, while men trained publicly. There were exceptions. Sparta famously encouraged women to exercise, arguing that strong mothers produced strong warriors. But here in Athens, the idea of a woman in the gymnasium would have raised eyebrows, if not outright scandaled. Here's a quirky tidbit. Vase paintings sometimes depict women exercising lightly at home with small weights or balls, a sort of ancient Pilates class. These sessions weren't formalized, but they hint at a shadow world of female training, small, private, and far removed from the booming gymnasium courtyards. You can almost imagine a group of women joking together, inventing their own routines while their husbands sweated in public. Historians still argue whether women were ever permitted into certain gymnasia on festival days, or whether those claims are exaggerations. Some inscriptions suggest rare moments of mixed participation, while others insist such mingling was scandalous. The debate underscores the point. Women's presence here was the exception, not the rule. You picture the strangeness of it. A girl in Athens grows up hearing tales of Atalanta, the fleet-footed heroine who outran her suitors, yet she cannot step into the very space designed to celebrate speed and strength. She might sneak glimpses from a distance, or hear her brothers boast about wrestling victories, but her own physical talents remain muted, hidden. The irony is sharp enough to sting. The men around you hardly notice the absence. For them, the gymnasium feels complete as it is. They wrestle, scrape oil, trade jokes, and debate politics, oblivious to the exclusion. But you feel the gap, the missing laughter, the voices never invited into this rhythm. A philosopher, beard dripping from his recent bath, muses aloud that balance between male and female energies is essential for a just city. His companions chuckle, one muttering that he's been reading too much foreign philosophy. Another insists women are best kept at home, safe from the dust and sweat. The philosopher sighs, but he doesn't press the point. The debate drifts away like smoke. The gym remains alive, torches burning, sandals scuffing, but you sense the divide etched into its foundations. The sand, the stone, the oil, all belong to men. Women's bodies, though equally strong, are relegated to myth, to whispers, to small private movements hidden from public sight. You lean against a column, the night air cool on your face, and you feel both the vitality and the absence. It's a world designed for half the population, a ritual of strength and status where women are specters outside the walls. And as the chatter swells again, laughter bouncing off marble, you realize how much history is shaped not only by what is present, but by who is kept away. The torches burn lower, casting the courtyard in a sleepy amber haze, and you follow the faint sound of sandals scuffing against sand. A group of boys is running drills under the sharp eye of their trainer, and you realize you're seeing the gymnasium in one of its most important roles, shaping the young into citizens. The boys are wiry, some barely into their teens, their voices still cracking as they pant. They sprint in circles, drop to the ground, then pop back up at the bark of an order. Their feet kick up little clouds of dust that shimmer in the torchlight. You can almost hear their groans of protest, though none dare quit. Discipline here is not optional. It's the first lesson of citizenship. Mainstream history tells us that Athenian boys entered the gymnasium around adolescence. Training wasn't just physical, it was moral and civic. The Peda tribes drilled them in running, wrestling, and discus, while philosophers quizzed them on justice, virtue, and loyalty to the city. This wasn't about bulking up for vanity. It was about sculpting a boy into a man ready to defend Athens with both body and mind. Here's a quirky tidbit. Part of the boys' discipline included strict silence at certain drills. They had to run or wrestle without uttering a word. If someone slipped and let out a yelp, the others were allowed to laugh, but the offender risked extra laps. Imagine middle school PE where breaking the silence earns you double burpees. Brutal, but effective. The trainer paces with a reed staff, tapping shoulders, correcting stances. He mutters that a bent back today becomes cowardice tomorrow, that weak lungs make for weak citizens. The boys nod, sweat dripping down their temples. Some look terrified, others determined. You can sense that the gymnasium is as much about fear of shame as it is about love of excellence. Historians still argue how much of this discipline was genuine education and how much was subtle indoctrination. Was it about teaching boys to think critically, or about programming them into obedient soldiers? The debate lingers, unresolved, like the echo of sandals slapping stone. The boys now move into wrestling pairs. One slips, and the others snicker until the trainer glares. Another wins his match, pinning his friend in the dust. Instead of gloating, he helps him up, murmuring something about teamwork. The lesson is clear. Personal glory matters, but unity matters more. This is not just exercise. It's rehearsal for standing shield to shield on the battlefield. Nearby, an older philosopher sits under a column, stroking his beard as he addresses a few boys too tired to keep sparring. He asks what it means to live with honor, whether courage is born or made. Their eyes dart nervously, unsure how to answer. One blurts out that courage is not crying when you fall. The philosopher chuckles but presses him. And what of standing for justice when alone? The boy frowns, chewing on the idea, his muscles still twitching from exertion. Even in exhaustion, the lessons seep deeper. The night air is cooler now, carrying the scent of oil, sweat, and faint incense from the shrine nearby. The boys collapse onto benches, gasping, while the trainer scolds them one last time. A few groan, but their eyes shine faintly with pride. They've survived another round. They've inched closer to manhood. You lean back, watching them yawn and stretch, and it's hard not to see the pattern. Exhaustion today, discipline tomorrow, citizenship forever. The gymnasium isn't just shaping bodies, it's shaping Athens itself, one breathless boy at a time. You leave the sleepy torchlit courtyard and drift along the dusty road that curls away from Athens, your sandals scuffing in a rhythm that could lull even the most caffeinated mind. The night smells of thyme and sea salt, and the stars feel close. Enough to pinch. As you walk, the city around you seems to ripple and shift, as if the map of Greece were a lazy quilt someone keeps tugging at. One blink and you're hearing Doric accents. Another blink and there's a new coastline, a different diet, and a whole new set of rules for how to sweat. From Syracuse to Sparta, and a few stops between, you sample gym cultures the way a foodie samples olives, slowly, savoring the brine, noting the bite. Syracuse, first. You can almost hear the harbor, ropes creaking, hulls thumping, gulls arguing like old men over checkers. The gymnasium here smells less of dry inland dust and more of briny air and fish markets winding down. Men oil themselves just the same. But the tone is more cosmopolitan. Philosophers and merchants share space with visiting athletes from across the sea. Syracuse is wealthy, and it shows. Fresh jars of oil, clean strigils, polished colonnades. You catch a trainer boasting that their wrestlers pick up tricks from travelers, that technique sails into port alongside grain and wine. The cities. Wealth has purchased a kind of athletic cosmopolitanism, body culture with a passport stamp. Mainstream history notes that Magna Graecia, Greek colonies in Sicily and southern Italy, produced legendary athletes. Think of Milo of Croton, whose feats became dinner party lore across the Greek world. You hear a coach in Syracuse recount the classic story. Milo lifts a calf every day until it becomes a full-grown bull, then hoists the bull onto his shoulders. Like it's Tuesday. The boys listening gasp. You try not to snort. Even without a fitness tracker, progressive overload seems to be the idea. Quirky tidbit. Though, some versions swear Milo once split a tree trunk with his hands and got stuck. When the wedges slipped out, leaving him to be, well, nibbled by wildlife. It's the sort of cautionary tale a coach tells with a straight face. Lift smart, or the forest snack bar opens. You can't help imagining the modern warning label. Do not insert hands in a tree while attempting. Personal best. Historians still argue whether Milo's bull-carrying regimen is fact or fabulous PR, a living billboard for Croton's athletic schools. The debate matters less than the pattern you feel in these colonies. Technique, showmanship, and borrowed brilliance from every ship that docks. Even the breeze seems to say, learn what sails in. You blink, and the accent changes again. Thebes. Now, inland and proud, where the mountains cradle the city like a hand. Training here feels more sober, less theatrical than the seaborne swagger of Syracuse. You pass a courtyard where pairs practice drill steps, structured, synchronized, strangely graceful. A rumor brushes your ear. Elite units train with almost choreographic precision, partners learning to trust each other as if fastened by an invisible strap. You don't need a program to see the message. Loyalty tightens the phalanx more than any muscle can. Someone cracks a joke that you can spot a Theban hoplite by his perfect pacing. You add silently that you could probably set a lullaby to it, slide south in your wandering mind, and you're in Ellis, where Olympic fever always sizzles just below the surface. Gyms here feel like the lobby outside a grand theater. Athletes angle for invitations, trainers talk odds, and everyone invents new ways to scrape a fraction more speed from tired legs. The air has a faint tang of ambition, sharp, citrusy, impatient. A boy whispers that his cousin is trying a novel interval pattern timed to a flute rhythm. Remember those lyre workouts? You watch him practice. Sprint, coast, sprint, coast. The music conducting lungs like a tiny tyrant. It's half science, half superstition, and all hope. But then the road narrows, the hills darken, and the scent of the sea is replaced by something flintier, leaner. Black broth, iron discipline, and the squeak of leather as shields are lifted and lowered. You have arrived in Sparta, where the gym isn't a club so much as an oath. The air feels austere, like a room that has been politely told to remove its cushions. Boys run in straight lines. Men speak in straight sentences. Even the shadows seem to stand at attention. Mainstream history anchors you. The Agoge, the Spartan training system, takes boys from family homes and braids them into the state. They run, wrestle, endure hunger, steal, but are punished if caught, not for the theft but for the sloppy execution. And Sleep-On Reed's softness has never met. Fitness here is not display, it is duty. You watch a trainer correct a stance with 2 words and a raised eyebrow. The boy adjusts as if the eyebrow were a spear point. If Athens oils the body to shine, Sparta sands the body to matte. Quirky tidbit. Before battle, Spartans famously combed their hair. Yes, grooming as a pre-fight ritual. You imagine the world's most hard-nosed soldiers pausing for a collective brush and bounce, because looking composed was part of the psychology. It's like tidying your desk before a big exam. Order outside, order inside. Also, black broth bubbles in a corner pot. Pork, blood, a whiff of vinegar, something an Athenian poet once mocked as soup that teaches fear. You give it a cautious sniff and decide you are, in fact, very educated. Historians still argue whether Sparta's regimen was as relentless as later writers claimed or partly an export brand. Sparta, polished by admirers and enemies alike. Did every boy truly thrive in the agoge, or did some quietly break under it? The sources murmur and contradict each other like uncertain jurors. What you feel in the dust, though, is unmistakable. Training here is not a ladder to status. It is the floor you stand on. You catch a rare moment of softness. Two youths finish a drill and exchange a brief smile that says, "Still standing." Their tutor pretends not to see it, which is his way of allowing it. Then shields rise, feet stamp, and the line becomes a single animal breathing through many mouths. You think of the earlier baths in Athens, gossip, steam, laughter, and realize how alien that would look under this sky. In Sparta, leisure is spelled with fewer vowels, and none of them are soft. Glide east in your mind, and a sea breeze returns. Crete, with mountain winds and archers practicing under the tilted pines. The gym here feels outdoor, cliff-edged, frugal, more goat bells than marble. A trainer teaches boys to run up scree without losing balance, feet whispering over the stones. Someone swears by goat milk as the perfect recovery drink. Someone else claims a local honey fixes everything except heartbreak. You file both ideas next to athlete goo in your growing list of ancient wellness cures. And then, almost as if the map refolds itself, you're back in a general truth. Each city-state sculpts the body to its own image. Syracuse curates, Thebes synchronizes, Elis auditions, Crete improvises, Sparta standardizes. Everywhere you go, you taste the same ingredients: oil, sand, chant, scrape, but the recipes diverge. The gymnasium isn't a single institution. It's a dialect spoken with quads and lungs that a soft callback drifts through your memory. The shrine. Flame in Athens, the jar of used oil offered to the gods. Here in Sparta, the offering would be silence. In Syracuse, it might be applause. In Elis, a stopwatch's ghost tick, even if they don't have one. The details change, but the lullaby remains. Breath in, breath out, step and stance, rhythm and rest. You wander on, the night now more velvet than ink. Somewhere behind you a spear drills the air. Somewhere ahead, a lyre tries to soothe it. You smile at the thought that if you opened a modern gym chain across these cities, you'd need a different pitch for each. Luxury packages in Syracuse, team classes in Thebes, performance labs in Elis, mountain conditioning in Crete, and in Sparta. Well, no membership card. Just show up and endure. 3 light jokes flicker through your head. A Syracuse platinum oil tier, a Theban 2-for-1 phalanx pass, and a Spartan no towel service, character building only. You chuckle under your breath, and the stars do not object.as. The road unspools and your stride grows slow and steady. You feel all these places settling into you like layers of a warm blanket. Different textures, same purpose. The Greek world trains the body the way a potter sinters clay. Push here, guide. There, add water, remove pride, and wait for the shape to emerge. You carry the echo with you, the slap of sandals in Syracuse, the drumbeat in Thebes, the whistle in Elis, the mountain wind in Crete, the solemn hush in Sparta, and the sounds braid themselves into a single sleepy cadence that keeps you walking softly, softly, until the dust becomes a pillow. The road you've been wandering now carries you toward a sound louder than sandals, louder than lyres, the roar of a crowd swelling like surf against stone. You blink, and the torchlit courtyards dissolve into something grander, a stadium stretching. Under the sun, stands packed with shouting voices, and banners of laurel green fluttering in the wind. You've arrived at the place where all that gymnasium sweat finds its stage. Olympic fever, a madness that turns local training into international glory. You shuffle into the crowd, the heat of bodies pressing close, the smell of roasted nuts, spiced wine, and dust kicked up by thousands of feet. Somewhere below, runners line up at the starting line, their bodies lean, bronzed, oiled. The official raises a hand, and suddenly the entire stadium hushes, a silence so thick you could sleep in it. Then, thud, A signal staff hits the ground, and the runners explode forward like arrows released. Mainstream history notes that the Olympic Games began in Olympia in 776 BCE, tied deeply to worship of Zeus. They weren't just contests, they were offerings, a way to honor the gods through human excellence. Victors didn't win money but eternal glory. Poets sang their names, statues immortalized their poses. You can hear echoes of those songs in the crowd around you. People already speculating which young athlete will be carved in marble before the year is out. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some athletes actually trained on diets that sound bizarre even by modern fad standards. One runner swore by figs alone, another by nothing but cheese. There's even a story of a wrestler who believed raw bull's blood was the secret to his strength. Imagine someone at your gym chugging a bull blood protein shake between sets. Effective? Questionable. Dramatic? Absolutely. The runners thunder past the finish line, chests heaving, sweat gleaming. The crowd erupts, throwing laurel leaves and shouting the winner's name. You feel the energy surge through you. These athletes aren't just competing. They're embodying everything the gymnasium drilled into them: discipline, endurance, pride. Historians still argue whether the Games truly fostered unity among Greek city-states or whether they were just a stage for bragging rights. On paper, the Olympic truce promised peace during the Games. In practice, rivalries ran hot, and victories were flaunted as proof of superiority. Perhaps both are true. The Games were a fragile rope bridge between war and peace, swaying in the wind of competition. You drift deeper into the stadium atmosphere. Boxers strap leather thongs around their fists, the leather stiff and crackling. They step into the ring, eyes sharp, and the crowd roars again. The blows land heavy, the sound like sticks hitting hides, and you wince as one man stumbles, dazed. Yet the cheers don't falter. Violence here is not a scandal, but a celebration. Nearby, discus throwers step into the sun, their arms carving arcs so clean you swear you can hear the whistle of bronze slicing air. Each throw hangs for a breathless second, then crashes into the sand far beyond, sending up clouds of dust. The spectators lean forward, hungry for records to be broken. For them, these aren't just games. They're proof that the Greek body, trained in the humble gymnasium, can touch the divine. You catch snippets of conversation in the stands. A boy insisting he'll be an Olympian one day, his father laughing, but secretly proud. An old man muttering that today's wrestlers aren't half as tough as those of his youth. The chatter feels timeless. You've heard the same voices at modern stadiums, only swap jerseys for togas. The heat builds, the chants grow louder, and you feel yourself carried along by the current. Athletes bow to Zeus, victors are crowned. With olive wreaths, poets recite verses that will ripple across generations. And through it all, the gymnasium lingers in the background. Every sprint, every lift, every scraped strigil having led to this one shimmering moment under the sunas. The stadium empties into twilight. The dust hangs in the air like incense. You wander back toward the quiet streets, ears still ringing with cheers. Olympic fever has passed for now, but the echo remains. A reminder that 2,000 years later, gyms still pulse with that same dream. Sweat today, glory tomorrow, applause forever. The cheers of Olympia fade into memory as you find yourself slipping back into quieter streets, where torchlight flickers low and shadows stretch long. The energy of the Games has drained away, leaving you wandering through a different sort of silence, a silence where not everyone had access to the sweat, the oil, or the glory. You begin to notice the people on the edges, exiles, outsiders, and slaves, figures who hovered just beyond the colonnades of the gymnasium. You pause at a side alley near one gym. A slave boy carries jars of oil, his bare feet dusty, his eyes downcast. He sets them by the door, then waits outside. He's strong, his arms corded from endless labor, but he will never wrestle in the sand, never scrape his skin with a strigil inside those walls. The gymnasium belongs to citizens, not to him. His strength is invisible, his body trained by toil instead of philosophy. Mainstream history tells us that gymnasia were civic institutions built for free male citizens. Foreigners, medics, slaves, and even freedmen had limited or no access. The gym wasn't simply about health, it was about belonging. To enter meant you were woven into the political and military fabric of the polis. To be excluded meant you stood outside the rhythm of civic life. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some foreign merchants in Athens actually built their own small training spaces, calling them xenoi gyms. They were humbler, less adorned, and sometimes mocked by locals as imitation sweat halls. Still, they offered a glimpse of how much outsiders crave the prestige of the Greek gym culture, even if it meant being laughed at for their knockoff versions. Imagine a modern budget gym chain sneered at by the luxury fitness crowd, only with more tunics and fewer smoothies. You watch as another figure approaches the gym's threshold, a medic, perhaps, his accent betraying foreign roots. He pauses, peers inside, but doesn't cross. You feel the weight of his hesitation, the invisible line drawn not in sand but in citizenship papers. He may contribute to the city with trade or taxes, but here, in this sacred space of sweat and status, he remains a guest at best. Historians still argue whether some gymnasia occasionally relaxed these rules, allowing foreigners during festivals, or for special fees. Inscriptions hint at rare exceptions, but the prevailing rhythm was exclusion. The gym reinforced the borders of belonging, as clear as the walls that kept outsiders looking in. Inside, the laughter of citizens echoes, banter about matches, jokes about slipped throws. Outside, you hear quieter sounds, slaves loading jars, sweeping sand, tending lamps. Their hands touch the gymnasium constantly, but their bodies remain unwelcome in its rituals. You realize that the glow of the gym was built on this silent labor, the polished marble kept shining by those who could. Never step onto the sand that a philosopher emerges, robe fluttering, and nearly bumps into a slave carrying refuse. He mutters something about justice, then strides away, oblivious to the irony. The boy shoulders the waist and disappears into the night, unremarked. You shake your head. It's the kind of contradiction history wears openly, expecting you to accept both brilliance and blindness in the same breath. You move farther down the road, where a group of exiles huddle in the dark, speaking in hushed tones. One recalls his days in the gym, the pride of belonging, the sound of sandals on sand. Now, banished, he relives it only in memory, his body still strong but barred forever from the rituals that once defined him. His voice cracks, not from weakness, but from the ache of disconnection. The night air smells faintly of smoke and sweat, lingering traces of the gym you've left behind. You feel the stark divide between those who stride confidently under torchlight and those who hover in shadow. The gymnasium, you realize, was not only a temple of fitness but also a gatehouse of identity, granting some the right to sweat in the open while others were consigned to silence. And as you walk on, the sounds of laughter fade, replaced by the faint shuffle of laborers' feet. The city breathes on both sides of the wall, but only one side gets to call it glory. The streets grow quieter, and you find yourself walking toward a colonnade where the air smells faintly of herbs, crushed leaves, and something sharp like vinegar. Here the gymnasium folds into yet another role, not just training ground, not just social club, not just temple, but clinic. You've wandered into the world where medicine meets muscles, where early physicians prescribe sweat as if it were a drug. Inside, men recline on benches, their bodies still glistening with oil. Beside them, a gray-bearded physician kneels with a clay jar, dabbing a poultice onto a twisted ankle. He mutters that balance must be restored. Too much heat, too much dryness, too much exertion, all must be countered. To his mind, the body is a delicate blend of humors, and exercise is one of the tools to stir them into harmony. You realize you're listening to the ancient forerunners of sports medicine. Mainstream history tells us that Hippocrates and Galen both emphasized exercise as a cornerstone of health. They recommended specific regimens depending on age, body type, and ailment. Wrestling for the strong, walking for the elderly, moderate running for the young. To them, the gymnasium wasn't frivolous. It was a literal prescription. You almost expect to see a scroll reading, take 2 discus throws daily, and call me in the morning. Here's a quirky tidbit. Galen once wrote that athletes who overtrained smelled sweeter, as if their sweat were proof of superior constitution. Imagine your doctor today sniffing your post-gym shirt and declaring you in perfect health. Equal parts flattering and horrifying. You watch as another physician mixes herbs into warm oil, massaging it into a runner's calves. The runner sighs. In relief, eyes half closing, the tension draining away. Around them, others chatter about aches, stiffness, or sleepless nights. The gym has become a pharmacy without shelves, its remedies drawn from exertion, oil, and touch. Historians still argue whether Greek physicians truly believed in the scientific efficacy of these treatments, or whether much of it was ritual and placebo. Was olive oil genuinely curative, or was the massage simply comforting enough to feel miraculous? The debate drifts through the centuries, like the faint scent of time wafting from the jars that a young boy limps in, holding his side. The trainer plucks his tongue and gestures him toward the physician, who prescribes gentler exercises and a change in diet. The boy nods solemnly, as though he's just been handed divine law. You realize the gymnasium, for all its sweat and shouting, also carried an undertone of care, a recognition that the body, strained too far, needs tending as much as testing. The courtyard is quieter here, the sounds more intimate, the soft squelch of oil rubbed into skin, the murmurs of advice, the sighs of relief. A man jokes that his back aches more from sitting through lectures than from wrestling. The physician smirks and prescribes both walking and fewer philosophers. Laughter ripples across the benches, light and easy. As you lean against a cool pillar, you feel the rhythm of this side of the gym. It's not the clang of bodies colliding or the roar of the crowd. It's the gentle cadence of care. Sandal straps loosened, muscles kneaded, minds reassured. The Greeks didn't separate training from healing. To them, they were different. Verses of the same hymn. The torches flicker low, casting long shadows across jars of herbs and rows of strigils laid neatly on a table. The physicians tidy their tools, the athletes stretch lazily, and the night sighs around you like a soft blanket. For the first time, the gymnasium feels less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary, a place where strength and fragility meet in equal measure. The herb-scented colonnade fades behind you as you wander farther, your sandals whispering across the dusty stones. The air grows warmer, more foreign, and the voices around you change. Different accents, different rhythms, still Greek, but flavored with something else. You've stepped into the Hellenistic world, that wide-armed empire, that Alexander left sprawling across continents. And with it comes a new chapter for the gymnasium: expansion, adaptation, and mingling with traditions far from the Aegean. You pause at the edge of a courtyard in Alexandria. The gym here dwarfs anything you saw in Athens: vast halls, polished marble, tall colonnades that seem to scrape the sky. Young men spar in one section, while in another, tutors lecture on astronomy, their students squinting at diagrams scratched in sand. The scent is different too. Incense from Egypt blends with olive oil, a heady perfume of cultures overlapping. Mainstream history reminds us that under the Hellenistic kings, gymnasia became centers of Greek identity abroad. In cities from Asia Minor to Egypt, they weren't just workout halls but institutions of language, philosophy, and citizenship, tools for spreading Hellenic culture. They served as both embassy and classroom, marking who was properly Greek in a sea of diversity. You realize these places were less like local gyms and more like cultural outposts. Here's a quirky tidbit. In Alexandria, some gymnasia supposedly had libraries attached, so you could wrestle in the morning and read papyrus scrolls in the afternoon. Imagine leaving your spin class and strolling straight into the library, dripping sweat onto priceless manuscripts. Somewhere, a scribe probably muttered curses about oily fingerprints on his life's work. The courtyard buzzes with this layered energy. You hear Greek spoken, but also Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, all tangled together. A boy from a local family eyes the wrestlers wistfully but hesitates at the gate. Membership often required Greek lineage or patronage. For outsiders, the gymnasium could be a barrier, a reminder that culture and power still drew lines. Even in cosmopolitan cities, historians still argue whether Hellenistic gymnasia truly blended cultures or merely imposed Greek ideals on conquered peoples. Some inscriptions suggest local elites eagerly joined, adopting Greek dress and training to signal sophistication. Others hint at resentment, whispers that these marble halls were symbols of foreign dominance. The truth, as usual, seems tangled, flickering between pride and protest. You wander farther east in your imagination. Antioch, Pergamon, cities where gymnasia gleamed like jewels. Each one feels familiar yet strange. Oil jars and strigils, yes, but also new gods honored, new rituals, fused with the old. A trainer barks in Greek, but his students' accents betray their mixed origins. You realize the gymnasium has become a vessel, carrying Athens outward but never returning unchanged. That a group of young men sits under a painted portico, discussing philosophy, while nibbling figs. One quotes Aristotle, another interrupts with a story from a local tradition, weaving wisdoms together. They laugh, argue, and clap each other on the shoulder, their sweat drying as words take over. It strikes you that these gyms are not only about spreading Greek culture, they're about creating hybrids, fusions that neither Athens nor Babylon alone could have imagined. In the distance, you hear the faint chant of Egyptian priests, mingling with the shouts of wrestlers. The sounds clash, overlap, then settle into a rhythm that feels strangely harmonious. The gym here doesn't erase difference, it hums with it. Buzzing like a hive alive with multiple queens, you lean against a marble pillar, the surface warm from the day's sun. Around you, the city breathes with layers, Greek, Egyptian, Eastern, and the gymnasium sits at the center, both bridge and border. The athletes stretch, the philosophers debate, the priests chant, and you realize you're standing in a crossroads, where sweat and scrolls, sand and incense, all converge. And as the lamps are lit and the sky dims, you feel the expansion settle into your bones. The gymnasium is no longer just Athenian. It has stretched, grown, reshaped itself, becoming a passport. And a password, a way to carry Greekness into lands where olive trees never grew. The haze of incense and foreign voices drifts away as you continue your wandering, and suddenly the streets feel heavier, more angular, lined with arches and aqueducts. The air smells of brick dust, roasting meat, and a faint tang of iron. You've entered Rome, where the gymnasium has been borrowed, repainted, and remodeled to fit an empire that devours everything it touches. At first glance, you might not recognize it. The Roman version sprawls not just as a courtyard, but as a full complex, tied to the famous baths, thermae, that pulse with life like miniature cities. Marble halls echo with footsteps, mosaics glimmer underfoot, and steam curls upward from vast heated pools. What began as Greek training grounds has merged with Roman engineering to become something grander, more indulgent, and undeniably Roman. Mainstream. History tells us that Romans adopted Greek gymnasia after their conquest of the Hellenistic world. They kept the exercise, running, wrestling, ball games, but wove it seamlessly into their beloved bathhouses. To them, a healthy citizen was one who could lift a shield and relax in a caldarium afterward. The body still mattered, but the social ritual of bathing, gossiping, and politicking became just as important. The gymnasia's bones were Greek. The flesh draped over them was Roman. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Roman baths had mechanical contraptions like giant treadmills powered by slaves, not for fitness, but for heating water. Imagine sweating through a workout only to realize it's some poor laborer on a wooden wheel making your pool warm. Romans got their cardio by delegation. You stroll through one of these complexes now. To the left, men toss a ball in a game called Harpastum, their shouts echoing off tiled walls. To the right, philosophers recline, still echoing their Greek predecessors, but their voices mix with senators haggling over grain prices. The space hums not with singular purpose, but with layers of leisure, politics, and training. You realize this is Athens on steroids. If Athens had a construction budget from Julius Caesar, historians still argue whether Romans truly valued athletic training as deeply as the Greeks or if they treated it more as entertainment. Some point to gladiatorial games as proof that Romans adored physical spectacle but outsourced the sweating to others. Others argue the popularity of baths and ball games shows a genuine cultural embrace of bodily exercise. The truth, like the steam, drifts somewhere in between. A trainer demonstrates wrestling holds for a few young men, his Latin commands sharp, his stance unmistakably Greek. You notice how the Roman crowd watches politely, but without the same reverence you saw in Athens. Here, Exercise feels practical, not spiritual. The gods are less present in the strigil and more present in the sheer architecture. The heated floors, the domed ceilings, the aqueducts feeding water endlessly. Rome worships engineering as much as muscle. In a corner, an old man mutters about how Roman youth are growing soft, spending more time lounging in the tepidarium than sprinting in the yard. His friend counters that strength now comes from organization, not from oiled biceps. You chuckle. Every generation thinks the next is getting weaker. Even 2,000 years ago, the atmosphere is indulgent. The steam wraps around you like a blanket, muffling the shouts of ball players, the clink of cups, the scrape of sandals on marble. You smell spiced wine, hear gossip about senators, catch whispers of military campaigns. Somewhere nearby, a poet recites verses comparing a gladiator's sweat to perfume. Because of course he does. You lean back against the polished wall, watching the bustle swirl. The Roman version of the gymnasium may have softened some edges, added luxury, infused sweat with spectacle, but the Greek skeleton remains visible. Men still wrestle, still run, still scrape themselves clean. The difference is scale, opulence, and intent. And as the lamps flare brighter against marble mosaics, you realize the gymnasium has crossed a cultural Rubicon. It has survived conquest, absorbed Rome's extravagance, and carried its heartbeat into yet another empire. The rhythm of sand and sweat continues, only now with echoes of Latin bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. The marble baths of Rome fade into the background, their chatter and steam dissolving into a quieter courtyard where shadows lengthen and voices lower. You follow the sound of debate, not the roar of wrestlers or splash of baths, but the steady cadence of philosophers arguing. For all the admiration of muscle and sweat, there were always voices warning that too much flexing might bend the mind. You see them gathered beneath an olive tree, robes draped, hands gesturing in measured arcs. One philosopher points at a group of youths wrestling in the sand and shakes his head. Strength, he mutters, is nothing without moderation. Overtrain the body, and the mind atrophies. His companion counters, reminding him that a weak citizen cannot defend the polis. Back and forth they go, like wrestlers themselves. Only their arena is words. Mainstream history notes that thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and later Roman writers often wrestled with the balance between physical training and intellectual cultivation. Some praised the gymnasium for producing well-rounded citizens. Others feared that obsession with brawn dulled the pursuit of wisdom. Even Plato, himself broad-shouldered, warned against athletes who spent their lives only in training, neglecting philosophy. The gym was both admired and critiqued, its value never uncontested. Here's a quirky tidbit. One Roman moralist complained that young men were wasting too much time oiling themselves, strutting around, and flexing in mirrors rather than studying law or politics. Imagine an ancient rant about gym bros hogging the mirror. Apparently, some complaints really are timeless. The wrestlers grunt louder, one slamming the other into the sand. The philosophers glance over, unimpressed. One murmurs, a pig wrestles too, yet no one calls it noble. The younger pupils laugh nervously, unsure whether to side with their tutor or admit they secretly admire the athlete's physiques. You feel the tension, the tug-of-war between admiration and disdain. Historians still argue whether philosophy truly kept its distance from the gym or whether most philosophers simply used the spectacle as fodder for metaphor. After all, comparing mental discipline to athletic discipline was one of their favorite tricks. Yet the criticism rings clear. They feared a society where men cared more about shiny shoulders than sharp minds. You wander closer and catch more snippets. A man may lift stones, one philosopher says, but can he lift an argument? Another adds, virtue is not measured in discus throws. A third sighs, admitting that exercise at least clears the head for study, but insists it should remain a tool, not an obsession. In the background, laughter erupts as a wrestler pins his opponent, the crowd cheering. The philosophers grimace, then resume their discussion, raising their voices to drown out the noise. It feels almost comedic, like professors lecturing in the middle of a frat party, both sides convinced the other has missed the point of life. The air shifts as twilight deepens. The athletes finish, scraping themselves clean with strigils, while The philosophers continue their debate, words cutting the air sharper than bronze. You realize both groups mirror each other more than they admit. Discipline, repetition, the pursuit of mastery. The difference lies only in which arena they choose to. As you lean back against a pillar, the night hums with this tension. Muscles or mind? Sweat or syllogism? The Greeks and Romans never settled it, and maybe that's the point. The gymnasium thrived in the middle of this debate, surviving because it was always both. A place where you could run until your lungs burned, then sit under a tree and ask whether running proves anything at all. And as the stars prick the sky, you chuckle softly. Some people will always see the gym as salvation. Others will see it as vanity. The truth, you suspect, is somewhere between the scrape of a strigil and the scratch of a philosopher's stylus. The debates under the olive tree fade into whispers as you drift farther down a colonnade that feels quieter, almost abandoned. The air is cooler here, tinged with dust and something faintly metallic, as if the stones themselves are tired. Since you've walked into a different time, when the gymnasium is no longer bustling with laughter and chants, but sagging under the weight of neglect. The age of decline has arrived. You step into a courtyard that once rang with the slap of sandals and the grunts of wrestlers. Now the sand lies uneven, scattered with weeds poking through. A broken strigil rusts near a toppled jar. The echo of voices is gone. In its place, you hear only the rustle of wind and the distant clang of a blacksmith somewhere beyond the walls. The gymnasium that once trained heroes now feels like a ghost. Mainstream history tells us that as wars tore through Greece, and later as Christianity spread, gymnasia lost their central place in society. They were damaged by invasions, neglected, by shifting priorities, or outright closed as pagan relics. Where once they embodied civic pride, they became symbols of a past age, their colonnades crumbling while new faiths and empires rose. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found old bath drains clogged with centuries of sand and olive oil residue, as if the very pipes choked on the memories of endless scraping and sweating. It's almost poetic. Plumbing as the historian of decline, you wander past cracked statues whose faces have eroded into anonymity. Some are headless, others defaced by chisel marks. Historians still argue whether Christians destroyed them deliberately, as symbols of pagan vanity, or whether time and neglect simply wore them away. The debate lingers like dust on the marble, part accident, part intention, part mystery that a small group of boys chases each other across the courtyard, their laughter echoing briefly before fading. They aren't here for training, they've just found an empty space to play. To them, the gymnasium is no temple, no school, no battleground, just ruins to climb. You feel the shift keenly. What was once the heartbeat of civic identity is now just another skeleton of stone to eye in a corner. An old man sits alone, muttering to himself about the days when Milo carried bulls and when wrestlers oiled their shoulders. Before combat, his voice cracks, but his eyes glow with memory. No one listens. The city has moved on. For him, the decline isn't only architectural. It's personal, the fading of a world he once belonged to. The twilight deepens, and you notice the weeds glinting in the last light, almost like laurel wreaths gone feral. The sand no longer shifts with disciplined footsteps. It lies still, a silent witness to centuries of glory and abandonment. You lean against a cracked pillar, its surface rough where polished marble once gleamed. And yet, there's something soothing here too. The silence feels like a long exhale after endless exertion. The gymnasia, after centuries of sweat and shouting, are finally resting. No trainers barking, no philosophers debating, no torches flickering, just the hush of dust settling into stone as the stars blink awake overhead. You realize you're standing in a lull between eras. The decline of the gymnasia isn't the end of the story, just the pause before the next reinvention. But for now, in this courtyard of dust and broken statues, the rhythm slows, and history itself takes a breath. The crumbling courtyard fades. Behind you like a dream dissolving with dawn, and when you blink again, you're no longer in ruins, but standing in a brightly lit room with mirrors stretching from wall to wall. The air hums with the thud of treadmills, the clink of dumbbells, and the faintly sweet smell of protein shakes. You've slipped forward into the present, and suddenly the echoes of the Greek gymnasium feel startlingly close. You watch people in neon sneakers and branded leggings pacing between machines, earbuds tucked in, faces glowing blue from phone screens. Yet under all the modern gloss, you notice the same ancient rhythms. Men and women lifting, running, sweating, pushing themselves for strength, for health, for status. The gym membership card in their wallet is just the latest incarnation of that Athenian oil jar. Mainstream history tells us that modern gyms draw direct lineage from the Greek gymnasia. The very word, gym, still carries the ancient root. Gymnos, even if no one's naked anymore, thankfully. Public fitness centers blossomed in the 19th and 20th centuries, but the DNA is ancient. Spaces where citizens gather to train their bodies, measure their progress, and compare themselves to others. 2,000 years later, the mirrors have replaced marble statues, but the glances of pride and competition are identical. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some modern gyms actually pump in signature scents, invigorating citrus, fresh linen, to make the experience feel healthier and cleaner. Imagine explaining that to an Athenian who would insist the only proper gym smell is a mix of olive oil, sweat, and sand scraped into jars. You can almost hear his disgust at eucalyptus-scented disinfectant wipes. You lean against a mirrored wall and watch. A young man flexes in front of the glass, admiring his arms the same way an ancient wrestler once admired his reflection in a polished bronze shield. A woman adjusts her form under the guidance of a trainer, just as a petatribes once tapped shoulders and corrected stances. Even the chatter feels familiar. Gossip between sets, encouragement from spotters, the occasional groan of someone who's clearly lifted too much. Historians still argue whether today's gyms are closer to Athens or Rome. Are they about discipline, training, citizenship, and identity? Or are they more about leisure, luxury, and social display, like Roman baths? You look around and think the answer is probably both, depending on whether someone's here for deadlifts or for selfies. The parallels multiply. Membership fees echo those ancient coins clinking into gym attendants' hands. Trainers correcting form repeat the voices of Greek instructors under the porticos. Even supplements, powders, and shakes mirror the old faith in diets of figs, cheese, or bull's blood. The packaging has changed, the impulse remains. You notice, too, that the gender divide has shifted. Where women once hovered outside the walls of Athens' gymnasia, today they stride in, running beside men on treadmills, squatting under bars, chatting over water bottles. The exclusion of Section 11 is gone, or at least mostly gone. Yet even now, whispers of division linger in debates about body image, access, and belonging. The ghosts of the old divide flicker faintly in the mirrors. Someone drops a barbell with a crash, and the whole room glances over, just as a Greek courtyard once froze when a discus sailed too far. The mix of awe, irritation, and respect is timeless. The culture of sweat and spectacle has not died. It's only updated its soundtrack to include pounding EDM. As you stand in the hum of machines, you sense the presence of every gym that came before. The sand yards of Athens, the disciplined drills of Sparta, the steaming baths of Rome. Each treadmill step, each clang of iron, each bead of sweat is part of a chain stretching backward 2,000 years. The Greek gymnasium may have declined into dust, but its spirit lingers in every swipe of a membership card. And as you exhale, listening to the rhythmic beat of sneakers on treadmills, you realize the hum of the modern gym is just the old lullaby of history, replayed with new instruments. The Greeks are still here, hiding in the mirrors, whispering through the sweat. The fluorescent hum of treadmills fades, mirrors blur, and slowly you drift back into a softer place where time itself loosens its grip. The shouts of athletes, the scrape of strigils, the debates of philosophers, all of it grows faint, as if the gymnasium's echoes are receding into a long corridor of memory. You walk down that hallway, barefoot now, the cool stone beneath your feet smoothing into something like sand, then like dust, then like nothing at all. The night air is gentle. You can almost hear a lyre strumming somewhere far off, a lullaby, threading its way through centuries. The torchlight of Athens, the steam of Rome, the chants of Olympia, they flicker and dim, not disappearing but blending into a single warm glow, like coals that refuse to die. You realize that across all these eras, the gym was never just about sweat. It was about connection, citizen to city, body to mind, mortal to God, past to present. Mainstream history concludes the gymnasium's legacy with its transformation into schools, academies, and eventually the gyms we know today. The lineage is clear, almost comical in its persistence. Oil jars became water bottles, laurel wreaths became medals, strigils became shower loofahs. But the spirit, that impulse to gather, train, and belong, never left. You sense it humming beneath every weight lifted, every lap run, every quiet sigh in a locker room. Here's a quirky tidbit to carry with you. One ancient source claims that after a big festival, Athenian cleaners would collect so much sand, sweat, and oil from the gym floor that it was carted away in barrels. The idea of someone sweeping up literal barrels of human residue to mark the end of a season is both revolting and oddly comforting. Even their mess became part of the ritual. Historians still argue whether the gymnasium's soul lay in athletics, philosophy, or religion. Was it first and foremost a training yard, a classroom, or a temple? Maybe it was all three, maybe none, maybe something subtler that can't be nailed down with certainty. But as you stand here at the edge of the story, it hardly matters. The debate itself is proof that the gymnasia never really left us. They live on in questions, in sweat, in echoes that will not quiet, the stars wheel overhead. The courtyard is empty now, yet not lonely. You sense every athlete who ever strained here, every boy who grew into a citizen, every philosopher who turned a sprint into a metaphor. Their voices are quieter than a whisper, softer than a breeze, but still present. You exhale, and it feels as though you've joined them, your breath added to the long archive of sighs that shaped this tradition. And as you sink into that quiet, your eyelids grow heavier. The sand becomes a pillow, the torches dim into fireflies, the debates dissolve into gentle murmurs you no longer need to follow. The gymnasium fades, but it doesn't vanish. It drifts with you, carrying its slow heartbeat into your dreams. The pace softens now, each sentence stretching longer, as though time itself wants you to rest. You've walked through Athens, torchlit yards, through Sparta's drills, through the steam of Rome and the hum of modern gyms. But here, at the quiet end of the journey, there are no more sandals slapping stone, no more philosophers lecturing, no more cheers echoing through stadiums. Just stillness, gentle and vast. Picture yourself lying in a courtyard under the night sky. The marble is cool beneath you, the air tinged faintly with olive and thyme. Somewhere, an owl calls once, then falls silent. Above, the constellations stretch patiently, stars the Greeks named long ago, still holding their shapes after thousands of years. You breathe slowly, your chest rising and falling in rhythm with the universe itself. The gymnasia you wandered through are now like dreams. Half remembered, dusty courtyards, strigils scraping, voices debating virtue. They float past like clouds, forming and fading without urgency. Each memory loosens, like knots untying from your shoulders. Even the weight of history feels light now, slipping away with each breath. Your mind softens too. No need to measure. No need to compare. No need to wrestle with what is right or wrong. The questions of historians, their arguments about access, meaning, or decline, fade into a gentle hush. What remains is only the rhythm of life itself. Move, rest, rise, sleep. The body trains, the mind ponders, the spirit drifts. It always has, and it always will. Feel the night deepen around you. Imagine the glow of a single lamp, its flame wavering softly in the breeze. The light doesn't fight the darkness, it blends with it, surrendering into a calm balance. That lamp is your breath, steady and small, carrying you peacefully forward. The voices of athletes and philosophers slip away now, leaving you entirely at ease. The gymnasia are empty, but you are not alone. You're carried by a tradition older than memory, older than marble or myths, a tradition that whispers gently. You are part of the same rhythm, and that rhythm is enough. Let your eyes grow heavier, let your muscles relax. Imagine lying back on warm sand, the grains shifting perfectly to cradle you. Above, The sky is vast and forgiving, a canopy stitched with stars. Each star blinks slowly, as if drowsy too, as if watching over you while you rest. There is nothing more to chase tonight. No races to run, no weights to lift, no debates to follow. Only this steady quiet, this deepening calm, this soft surrender. Breathe, slowly, evenly. Let the story dissolve like mist at dawn. The gymnasia have faded into silence, and now the silence itself welcomes you. Rest here, safe, calm, and timeless, sweet dreams.